Welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, helping people take their leadership to the next level. Brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International.
Well, Richard, it's always nice to sit across from you and talk deep things about leadership.
Yeah, it's always nice to sit down and get some focus on that very important subject.
Yeah, and if you're new to the podcast, first of all, welcome. And about once a month, we try to do what we're calling a leadership book review. And just want to remind you that next week, we're going to be looking at Leading Minds by Howard Gardner. That's going to be the book we're going to just sort of talk through. And Richard, you're going to give your thoughts on that.
2 cents worth?
Your 2 cents, yeah. So just...
maybe some change?
Yeah. The more the merrier. So if you haven't read it or if you're not familiar with it, maybe just do a quick Google search and see what you can find out about it and join in the conversation with us next week as we discuss that. But today, we're not doing a book review. We're talking about the optimistic leader. And, you have said that leaders come in all different shapes and sizes. Mm-hmm. There's introverts, extroverts. Some are great at public speaking, others not so much. And what would you say then is there a characteristic that is universal for a leader to succeed?
Well, you're right. There's so many different kinds of leaders and personality types involved, but there do seem to be a couple of things about leaders that are pretty characteristic of all the leaders you meet, and however it plays out in their own particular personality. And one of those, I think, that is so important is optimism, or you might say confidence. A leader has got to be confident. If a leader is not confident in their ability, then their followers have no reason to be confident either. And leaders have to inspire hope. They have to inspire enthusiasm. Leaders solve problems. And so if a leader shows up on the field, you've got to believe they have what it takes to solve that problem. If they don't, you need a different leader. And sadly, over the years, I've come across people in leadership positions that at times even prided themselves on being pessimists. They would tend to look at the problems. When they came into the room, everybody else might be brainstorming about possibilities, and they would have to say, okay, let's bring this thing back down to earth here, and someone needs to just point out that there's this or there's that. And they would pride themselves
back to reality.
Yeah, the harsh reality that for some people tends to be negative, and yet I find that for a leader, you have to believe that there's a solution, that there's an answer. You think about people like Steve Jobs when he returned to Apple. Apple had been somewhat adrift. They'd had some products that were not doing well. They were going in this direction and that direction, and then Steve Jobs walks back in the room. And I think everybody sort of breathes a sigh of relief and says, this is the guy who can get this thing turned around. Schultz over Starbucks at one point had to return and take over the CEO operations because Starbucks had gone adrift. And, there are just certain times where an organization or a church will face some kind of problem that it seems it's having difficulty overcoming. And a good leader will step up and say, there is a solution. I may not know what it is right now, but I know we can find it. And so I think being an optimistic, upbeat, positive leader that inspires hope, however you do it. I mean, you can do that. Some people do that through inspired speeches. Others do it just very quietly as they permeate their leadership team and the organization. There's lots of ways to do that, but when people are around you, they've got to come away confident. That's what they said about Winston Churchill. We throw him in there.
Yeah, you've mentioned him once or twice before.
When France was being devastated by the Nazis and was recoiling under that invasion, the French were demoralized, and Churchill flew over to France to try to sort of encourage their resistance, their resolve. And people said you couldn't be around Churchill without having more courage and confidence. You might be worried and frightful, but when he walked in the room, you thought, okay, maybe there is a way. Maybe it's not, all is not lost yet. And I think to at least a certain degree, every leader needs to bring that to the table when they walk in the room.
You know, I'm thinking about this, and what would you say is the difference between that and just being naive or overly optimistic? 'Cause
Yeah.
I feel, you know, you can certainly take this too far and just, you know, well, that guy just is not based in reality at all.
Right.
So,
Well, you know, and I remember reading how Henry Ford in his later years got into real being positive speaking, and even as he's older and failing in a lot of his leadership ability, whenever anyone saw him and said, "How are you doing?" he'd always say, "Great, this is the best day of my life." And that was just his pat answer, you know, no matter what was going on. He might have just had a root canal, but he would say, "This is the best day of my life." And when he got to a certain age, I guess he was just glad to be alive one more day. But
sure.
but in some ways, that kind of rings hollow after a while, you know, because not every day is necessarily a fantastic day. But and so if you come in and you're all smiles and you don't necessarily really focus on the problem, then it's just wishful thinking. And I think leaders are more than just thinking naively, "Oh, well, I'm sure it'll work out somehow." I mean, leaders tackle problems. They get their hands dirty. They're not unrealistic in the sense that they take a hard look at the issues in front of them. And they know it may take time, it may take a lot of effort and expense. But at the same time, leaders have a way of eyeing up a problem and saying, "Now, I know it's going to take a lot of phone calls. It's going to take some meetings with our attorney. It's going to take some team meetings. It's going to take a lot of planning and so on. But I also can do the math and figure out, well, this is solvable. This is something we can turn around." And so naivete just says, "Oh, I'm sure it'll work out." And there's a bunch of empty kind of platitudes
Yeah.
that ring hollow. But then there's others who come in and they analyze things and they walk away and say, "Yeah, this is doable. This is not a hopeless situation."
You know, I wonder, is it easier to be a positive leader in, you know, if you come into difficult circumstances versus being a positive leader when things are just fine?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, maybe they don't stand out as much when everything's going well, you know.
Right. Well, and it doesn't necessarily make as much difference. If everybody is in a good mood, you know, the
Yeah.
fact that you are doesn't make much difference. But if you're on the ship and all the sailors are terrified in the midst of the storm and you're still very calmly walking about the deck, confident that you'll make it through fine, then that brings way more impact.
Yeah.
It was said of Stonewall Jackson that, he in the midst of the fierce fighting and there's bullets flying all about and his young soldiers are terrified at the onslaught of the enemy. They said that Jackson would be just riding back and forth along the lines, just speaking very soothingly to his young soldiers as if he was just putting his children to bed after a bedtime story. And they said when you saw Jackson riding calmly on his horse, not ducking, not flinching, seemingly completely calm, that just gave enormous confidence to the soldiers to fight for him, because they thought, well, if our general's not concerned, then we don't need to be either. And so I think that that optimism, you need to have it all the time, but it's especially important when things are difficult.
Yeah, and how much of being positive is more about the leader's perspective?
Well, the perspective is so important. And first of all, the leader himself, what comes out of his mouth reflects what he's focusing on. So if he's talking about problems all the time, then it's clear that's where he's looking as well. If the leader's talking about possibilities and potential and what's going to come as a result of solving this problem and overcoming this difficulty, then you realize they're looking beyond just the problem to the possibilities, what lies ahead. And so when you hear people, I'll spend a lot of time with business and church leaders, and I'll ask questions about how are things going, and I'll hear people. It's always interesting when I ask, how are things going in your organization that you lead? And then you just listen to what comes out of their mouth. And if the first 4 or 5 things are all problems and difficulties, you know where they're focusing.
Yeah.
And you realize, well, that's what's in their heart. That's what's consuming their attention. And so I'm assuming that when they're talking to staff and to other people in the organization, that that's what they're talking about as well, is all the problems, the difficulties. And our problem sometimes as leaders is that we don't realize how we're perceived sometimes. If you're walking about and you're never smiling, that can be huge. You always seem uptight. You always seem tense. You're always distracted. Well, that sends all kinds of cues to the people that says, wow, what's he so uptight about? If what does he know that has made him so worried? Well, then all the way down the ranks, people are concerned. But if you're smiling, if you're confident, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be a busy, hard-working day, but you walk in to the room and you're smiling, you're confident, you're relaxed, you're at peace. That goes a huge distance in instilling hope and confidence to all the people around you. And so I think sometimes, and that's where perhaps even a leadership coach can be helpful, because I think a lot of times we think that we appear calm, we think that we're at ease, but we've got all kinds of nervous habits and distractions, and we don't give eye contact with people. There's something to be said about walking up to someone that you lead and looking them right in the eye and telling them with confidence it's going to be fine. We're going to get this thing worked out. That goes a long ways. But if you're racing down the hallway and they're seeing you in and out of meetings and hushed conversations, everybody's worried. What's going on? Are we going to make it? Is this solvable? Is our boss about to quit? But there's a way to not be naive, but confident, and some of that comes from just a track record. And I found that as a leader myself. When you first start out and you've never had to solve a lot of problems, then when those problems start coming, you may wonder, well, do I have what it takes? But when you've been at it for a number of years and you've successfully solved all the various problems that you've faced as a leader, there comes a point where you just know this is just another one of those problems. I've solved dozens of these before, and this is nothing unusual. This is nothing that's beyond the scope of what we can handle. And it also tells everybody else around you, hey, our boss has dealt with much bigger stuff than this before. And so certainly he can handle this as well. That gives you a certain aura of confidence and credibility with others as well, which is why you want to be building a track record of success. You want to be celebrating small wins. Sometimes if you've had 15 small wins, you've solved 15 small problems, then when the big problem comes along, it may be bigger than any one you've ever solved before, but you remind everybody, remember all those other things we dealt with, and we took care of all those. And so, like David said, I've never taken on a giant before, but I've killed lions, I've killed bears, and the same God who helped me kill those is the same God that will help me kill this, this massive soldier standing in front of me.
Great. Well, let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, we will finish up.
Ready to take your leadership to the next level? The Entrepreneurial Leaders Program is a one-week intensive course at Oxford University designed to help marketplace and entrepreneurial leaders develop the skills they need to have a greater impact on their business and community. Don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to study under Dr. Richard Blackaby and other leadership experts at one of the world's most prestigious academic institutions. This transformational course will run from August 11th through 19th, 2019. For more information or to register, visit entrepreneurialleaders.com. The link will be in the show notes.
Richard, before the break, you mentioned just, smiling at people and your demeanor, how you carry yourself can really have an impact. And that reminded me of a president of a school that I went to, of a university, and every time you saw him, he had a smile on his face. He was just, happy to greet you, and that really, even, I didn't work for him, but I was a student at his university, and that just really just has a way of encouraging you.
Yeah.
Even just a brief passing in the hall, that just can really, it has a lot of power. Just your demeanor, not even your words.
Yeah. For sure. I remember when I became a pastor of a church, the church had gone through a lot of difficulties, a lot of struggle. It had declined in attendance. The finances had dropped dramatically. There have been just a lot of hurts, some really dark days, and now I'm coming in as the next pastor, and there's lots of problems, and there's lots of questions about, can this young pastor in his first pastorate, does he have what it takes to turn things around? And there were several things I guess I did perhaps instinctively at the time, but one thing which a lot of pastors will do and lots of other leaders will do, but I often would position myself at the front door and just greet people as they came in the door. And I wasn't necessarily shaking everybody's hand as they walked in, but as people walked in the door, they'd see their pastor smiling, upbeat, joking around, happy. And as people are going into the building, I mean, their first experience is the pastor confidently smiling, anticipating a great day. Well, that just sets the whole mood,
Yeah.
And so whether you're leading a board meeting and you're there at the door as all your leadership teams walking in, and you're smiling at each one as they coming in and joking with them and setting them at ease, you can set the tone of a meeting just by that attention, that smiling, that you're kind of announcing, okay, I'm expecting a really good day today, and so you should be as well. I think also just with your words, like I see a lot of leaders who use namby-pamby words, wishy-washy words,
Oh, wish you.
and
I was going to ask, what's mamby-pamby?
uh, people that don't play hockey often are namby-pamby, but it's words that, for instance, if the word leaders are masters at using the right words, and so when someone says, "What do you think about this new program?" If you say, "I think it'll be okay," well, don't use the word "okay." That's a terrible word. Say it's going to be, I'm really excited about this new program. This has enormous possibilities. It's amazing how, and I'll see this all the time with leaders. I see this a lot with pastors in front of their churches. They'll use a word, and I don't mean that you should just be over the top about everything, but don't just use lukewarm words, because
Yeah.
you get a lukewarm kind of response. Use upbeat, positive words, exciting words, words that are big, that are hopeful. There's a lot of symbolic things a leader can do that inspire all kinds of confidence. Some things I guess I did early on in my leadership career that just came instinctively, but I remember going to my very first church out of seminary. I was coming in view of a call with my wife, so I wasn't even called to be the pastor yet. We were visiting there to interview, and then they were going to vote on us. And so Layman had picked us up at the airport, and the first thing they wanted to do was drive us by the church building so we could see it. And so we enter the building. He walks to the back of the room to get the lights turned on, and I'm looking around at the edges of the building. And this building used to be full in years gone by, but now it's quite empty. Lots of areas not used, lots of chairs not needed. And so I'm looking around the edges of the building, and he came back with the lights on, and he's wondering why I'm staring at a wall. And I said, well, is this a load-bearing wall? And I'm not even sure I knew necessarily all that entailed. But he said, well, why do you ask? And I said, well, because when this building fills up, I'm just wondering how easy it would be to expand this auditorium so we could seat more people in here. And I'll never forget this guy. He was one of the key laymen in the church. He looked at me for a moment, and then he just got this big smile on his face. And you could just see the man thinking to himself, this guy's not thinking about holding on. This guy's not thinking about hanging in there. He's already talking about expanding, and he's only been in the building for 10 minutes. And I wasn't doing that just to make a show. That's the way I considered it. If I'm going to come here, I don't care how many people are here now. I just want to make sure that there's room to expand later.
Yeah.
Because I know we're going to fill up. And I remember after we'd been there about a month in the summer, in August, Lisa and I decided we're going to have everybody at the church over to our house on Sunday evening. So if you came to the evening service, afterward you come and we're going to have a bunch of food and just have a party at our house. And we didn't have a real big house, but we didn't need one then because the church wasn't very big. But everybody pretty well in the church wanted to come over to the pastor's house afterward. And it was a lot of fun. And everybody was laughing, and the kids are playing, and we're just having a great time and just joking around, not a major agenda. And then at a certain point, I was just going to say a couple of words to the adults. And again, this sort of just came naturally to me. But I said, this has been so much fun. I just so love being with you in this church, and it's such a wonderful church. But I said, the only thing that makes me a little sad is that we really need to enjoy being able to do this right now, because we're going to be growing, and a time will soon come where I can't fit all of you in my house anymore. So, and what I was trying to just say to them is, yeah, we're small now, and because we're small, I can fit all of you in my house, but we're not going to stay small. And I know you've been through difficult times in the past, and you've had problems, and a lot of people have left this church that used to attend, and that's all sad, but that's not what's going to characterize us in the future. What will characterize us in the future is we're going to keep outgrowing space, and we're going to need more room. So, and I sort of said, look around and see this quaint little intimate group that we are right now.
Yeah.
Because later I said, you can tell everybody, I was one of those few that started out when Richard came as pastor, and now look at all the people that are here. Those kind of things communicate a lot. It tells the people, our leader is not focusing on the past. He's not focusing on the problems. He's already anticipating the glory days that lie ahead. And everybody wants to get on board some train that's going to glory, to great places, you know.
Yeah.
They want to be a part of something exciting. And so you convey that. And for instance, I tell pastors, if you're going to speak to your people, speak confidently. Don't talk about, well, hopefully some of you will want to do this. Say, I know you will want to do this. If you have an altar call, don't say, if anyone, if no one comes, we'll close the singing. Say, no, I know that God has spoken. I know that you want to respond to what God is doing. And so as the music begins to play, you begin to come. There's a difference between being wishy-washy, where it's not even sure that or apparent that the leader thinks anything's going to happen. And when the leader speaks confidently and says, God is working here, God has spoken, and so I know that you're going to want to be a part of that. I'll tell you what, people don't want to jump on board with a wishy-washy leader. So speak confident. Now do your homework so you're not just being naive, but God is on his throne, and God is in charge. And life is good. And I tell people sometimes we get so immersed in the problems that we forget what a joy it is to be in the job that we are in. You know what? We've got problems right now, but this is a great place to work. And I get to work with great people. And we will solve this. And I get to go home at night with a great family and a great life, and live in a great country and serve a great God. And there's just so many good things about life right now that how could I not be upbeat and positive? It's, at the moment we're dealing with a problem, but that's going to pass, and life's going to be great, even better. And so many things are going to be wonderful that I'm not going to get just buried in this current problem, because it's going to pass. It won't be a problem one day. So I'm not going to let it define my life and rob me of the joy that I ought to be having right now, just because we're dealing with a problem at the moment. So the leader sets the tone, and he sets the perspective for his people, so that where the leader looks is where the people will look. So if the leader's focused on problems all the time, that's where the people will focus. If the leader focuses on possibilities and things that are positive and the future and the excitement of being a part of that organization, that's where the people will focus as well.
Well, that's great. Let's leave it there.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, review us on Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. If you have questions or comments, please email us at podcast@blackaby.org.